Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first day of TechCon. It's great to have all of you here. I am Nicole. I'm the CMO of Daversa. I will be your moderator today, and I'm thrilled that we're all here to talk about a panel about what we consider the ultimate differentiator, which is talent. At Daversa, we are obviously in the business of building exceptional leadership teams. It's what we do day in and day out. And I can say with confidence that the breakaway companies understand one simple truth time and time again, and that there are three things that define a company's success. One, the people, two, the team, and three, the timing. And number one, without fault, is what differentiates the companies that win from those who don't. So today, we are joined by three leaders who each bring a very unique perspective on building and scaling exceptional teams. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. First up, we have Paul Daversa, the founder and CEO of Daversa. He is recognized as the top exec headhunter in tech, delivering access to the top 1% of talent, and has built leadership teams for OpenAI, Datadog, Plaid, Harvey, Poolside, CoreWeave, and many more. Next up, we have Xander Alman. He is a founder turned VC, so he's been on both sides of this. He's the founder of Commodity Capital. Xander backs bold entrepreneurs who really focus on scaling transformative companies, and he's an early investor in Armada, Hadrian, and Varda, to name a few. And last but not least, we have Rick Jones, who is the head of talent at OpenAI, where he is leading the global strategy for building the team behind what is arguably the most transformational company of our generation. And prior to OpenAI, he scaled teams at Stripe, DocuSign, Meta, and Salesforce. So we have 45 minutes today. I was told that we are not primed and ready for a Q&A session in here, but we're going to break some rules. So at the end of this, if we have a few minutes left, I want to open this up to the audience. So we're going to hop right into it and really talk about company's greatest asset today, which is its people. So I want to dive right in, and I'm going to turn this over to you first, Paul. You've built thousands of management teams across every industry, stage, function, vertical. But in your experience, what makes a founder great at hiring, and what separates those who excel at building transformational teams from those who struggle?
Tricky one. There's a lot there. I'm going to try to somehow weave in whatever questions I get a narrative around a story, because I think you'll learn more from that than you actually do with some nuggets. So I'm going to answer the question first, and I'm going to try to squeak something in. When I'm thinking about what makes a founder great, and I'm at a stage and age in my career now where I'm coaching lots of young founders. I was once the young guy in the industry, looking up to the guys trying to retain some wisdom, and now coaching lots of young founders in our industry. The first thing that I would say that is my number one driver that I look for is this emotional intensity that transcends nearly everything from other founders. And that emotional intensity is something that finds its way into the human spirit. Founders that have old souls that somehow, when you sit with them, you blink because you can't believe they're 22, 25, or 30. They ask about your kids. They understand closing someone in their living room. They are at dinners. They really transcend nearly everything. The second thing is there are what I call leadership inflection points. And these leadership inflection points are super critical as you're building your company, because what you're thinking if you're a founder is that you're going to have a straight shot, zero to unicorn. And the likelihood is you're going to rebuild your teams 3 times. And wrapping your arms around that and unpacking that is quite difficult. So the leadership inflection point is when your company hits a point where your escape velocity is creating a evolution where your company starts to grow faster than people can develop. It's time to make that switch. And I'm working with a swath of founders who really comprehend that. And in reality, youth would belie that. And then the third one is, there's a phrase I tell people: your ego is not your amigo. Ego is the death of talent. And humility wins the day. Humility sells. People want to see a soul. The soul is representative in your company. So before I take up too much air in here, when I started in industry, I begged, plead, hollered, and called for 30 straight days, cold called this guy I didn't really know who he was. Many of you may not, but his name was Jack Welch. He was, right down the road. He ran this company, GE. And somehow he worked with a 28-year-old guy who allowed me to do his talent. Jack had what he called the 4 E's. I still use this. I'd encourage you to write it down or put it in your phone because today it's still the same thesis of which I judge talent and most of my operators, venture capitalists, private equity, and founders. And they are the following: energy, energize others, edge, and execution. And when I was with Jack, we'd evaluate a candidate and I'd be like, hey, Jack, how you doing? He's like, I'm great. I'm like, how do we do? And he'd be like, love this guy. Unbelievable energy. Great. He can energize others. And he's got great edge. I'm like, that's amazing. He's like, but he can't execute a fucking thing. He's out. And Jack would be super disciplined on this and only hired the 4 E's.
I love that. So what have we learned? Your ego is not your amigo, and we must execute on the 4 E's. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to throw this over to you, Rick. Let's talk about OpenAI for a moment. I think that most people in this room would assume that recruiting for your company is easy because of essentially because of the attention it attracts. I want you to tell me why I'm wrong in this question. How do you cut through the noise personally and find the people that actually drive the impact? And what's the one non-negotiable principle that you rely on when you evaluate them?
Yeah, that's a good question. First thing I want to call out is that we have a very, very good product, and we're very fortunate to be where we are, and we've got a very talent-dense company, but we can never take that for granted. We've always got to kind of really stay focused on how we scale both product and talent. And the way we do that is more a testament to the team than me. I appreciate the question to me, but it really is the team itself. And there's two really key components to this. The first is the team of recruiters and sourcers. They completely embed themselves in their businesses. They understand their leaders, their priorities, and the overall organizational health so that they deeply understand the evolution of the organization, how that ties to those priorities, and then those values and sort of properties or behaviors, I guess, of the talent that you really need to bring into the team to either double down in some areas or even close some talent gaps. And by doing that, it gives you fantastic signals so that when you go back to the noise, let's say, the overall community of people you're looking to hire, it actually is far easier to start to see those standout people and really kind of cut through that noise. And then the second part is the community itself. I think one of the trade-offs that talent has made as companies have gone through hyperscale is that it's become extremely transactional. And they run through deep pipelines of candidates really as quickly as possible to be able to then make those hires as they come through. But that's such an expensive way to hire. And if you really take the time to engage with those communities, really understand and build a network within, that top talent will start to surface itself. And so as that starts to become true, you're starting to kind of build your own book of business, and then you must nurture that. Really treat these people you're working with as another human being. They're not that next hire. There's someone that you care about, there's someone that can add a lot of value, and there's someone that actually the role you have might not be the right fit for them, and having that conversation is really critical. And so in summary, I think that really understanding and honestly being joined at the hip with your business and business leaders, and then connecting in a very meaningful way with those communities that you hire, it really does help you cut through that noise. And then to your second part of the question, we heard it a moment ago, it's values and mission alignment. You cannot compromise on that. It's the thing that is our North Star. It connects us all to this as a single team, regardless of our role, our function, etc. And you can hire some really brilliant people, but if they are not aligned with the mission, if they're not aligned with your values, they're actually going to become a detractor and create different challenges. And that can be a temptation. You've got this brilliant, shiny person, but if they don't have the 4 E's, you're going to inherit some other challenges as well. And so, yeah, it's definitely mission alignment and values.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. Xander, I want to get your perspective from the VC side. You're an early investor in companies like Armada, Hadrian, Barda, where the stakes and complexity is incredibly high. For founders in this room who are preparing to raise or scale, what are the signals that show VCs, these founders have the leadership to both build the product and the team?
Yeah. So can I do a quick poll?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go for it. There's no rules in this panel.
Fair enough. So raise hands if you're an investor. Okay. Founder. Operator. Perfect. Okay. So this is perfect for the founders in the room. Great set of questions. So we basically have what we call our investing principles. So the first thing is the founder. The second thing is founder market fit. And the third is the market itself. So the founder and the framework that we use to identify that is very similar to the 4Es. Are they energetic? Are they going to be able to execute? Are they going to energize others? And that really helps you as a founder and the company to get through all the really bad stuff that's going to happen to you. I know in the last panel that we sat in on for a little bit, they talked about raise when you don't need it. Well, that is never the case. You always need it. So you just need to be able to make sure that the founder's got the grit to get through those really tough moments in the life cycle of a business. The second thing on founder market fit is also slightly related to the energy, but it's more about, is this person extremely energized about the market that they're playing in? And so when you have a misalignment between founder and founder market fit, you just don't get that energy that comes to work every day. You feel like it's a slog on top of the slog that it is every single day. And then the third thing is the market. And so the market really kind of gives the VC or the investor and hopefully employees look at your company if you're starting a business, no differently than an investor would. Is this market big enough to win? And if you do win it, are you going to have that huge outcome that all investors and employees are looking for? So we basically boiled it down to those three things. And if any of those boxes are not checked, we don't do it. If we find a founder that's got really good energy, big market, just not founder market fit, we try to help them figure out maybe a different strategy that we feel would be best fit for them, because we see a ton of businesses every single day. The market thing is a little bit different. Sometimes you find a fantastic founder, great market fit, the market's just not big enough. That's where you kind of have to go with your gut. You end up in a situation like an Uber, where Uber initially started out going after the black car business, which at the time was minuscule. And then it actually ended up expanding transportation globally, significantly so. So it's, there are parts and times when you're going to rely on one of those three more than the other two. But the best companies all have those boxes checked. And that doesn't necessarily mean that a company that's late stage, that founders maybe don't have that founder market fit anymore. And I know this is something we're going to talk about later. But there's ways that you can put the right people around them to help get them through those moments in time, whether, they're getting close to an IPO. A lot of founders aren't set up for that because most have never gone through an IPO before. So there's been a ton of companies that have gone through that phase. So there's different ways that you can help coach, and you can bring people like Paul to the table to kind of help them get through those, people management exercises that are needed and through the really tough spots. But yeah, so it's basically founder, are you energetic? Do you have the grit, and can you hire? 2 is founder market fit. Are you fitting is the business fit for you, and vice versa? And then 3rd is the market big enough? So if you do win it, is it really worth your time? So yeah, those are my
thank you.
there.
And you touched on a piece we're going to get to actually in a little bit, which is the grit, which inevitably rolls into the high will versus high skill. So we will get to that, but all great call outs. So thank you. So I think we've covered kind of in this first part, which is, how you discover kind of talent strategies and transformational leadership. And I want to transition a little bit to kind of building teams and securing the buy-in, but also just kind of some stories and past experiences. So I want to bring this back to you, Paul. In terms of the young CEOs that you've worked with, you've seen it all, but what are the most common pitfalls you see when these young CEOs or young founders are hiring leaders for the first time? And how do you help them avoid making those mistakes?
Okay, I'm gonna try to unpack whether or not there's a age thing between founders that are young and those that are in the summer or late fall of their careers. But I'm going to try to answer the question. First of all, I'm a founder. I'm founder led. I have the great fortune to work with some of the great founders of this generation and the generation of the past. We all know what back channels are. If I get back channel, there's one ding on me in the industry from most of the major venture capitalists and private equity is that I am founder friendly and that my loyalties are to founders. The good news is I'm now at a stage in my career and a level where I have enough confidence, courage to push back, and people know I don't care. You hire me or you don't, and I have enough founder support from very important founders that it's carried my business forward. So I love founders. I'm going to focus less on pitfalls and more of what I see. You did ask me young. I met Evan Spiegel when he was 16 kids in a hut on Venice Beach. I worked with Adam Newman when he was still trying to make a collapsible heel for women. I worked with Drew at Dropbox, Brian at Airbnb. Today I have the great fortune to work with Sam Altman. But I've also spent last night with the founders of Cursor and a very interesting, cool company in San Francisco called Mercor, which is a hockey stick spike to 20-year-olds. The Brex founders. So, what are the common themes with those? What I think are great founders who have done remarkable things that I see, regardless whether you're a young founder or a founder in your 30s, 40s, or 50s for that matter. The first one on the young side, if I were to point to something young, relatively immature, or in age founders, I would say there, and we've already used this word. So there's a new word that has manifested itself called signal. I'm looking for signal. Where's the signal? And the reality of that is that signal, I think, with void of data, is another word for what's your gut say. So the first thing is people talk about signal. I'll debrief with the founder and I'll be like, well, how did it go? It's like, we got really terrible signal. Why did you get terrible signal? Well, he was checking his phone and, he was distracted and the whole team kind of got this, signal that, this guy has a hard time focusing. And I told this founder, I said, what if I told you that his wife was dilating? Does that change things? Because he called me, his wife was dilating. And so signal without data, I think, is obsolete. And that leads to making decisions based on obsolete assumptions. So we all make decisions like, oh, you can't do this, or that's not going to work, or this is not going to work. And I'm a believer that making a statement not supported by data is a obsolete assumption. So that's the first one. The second one is back channels. I have a very loud voice in the venture. I have a very loud voice in general.
I was going to ask you to clarify that, but thank you.
Well, you heard that growing up.
Sure did.
So I have a very loud voice in Silicon Valley. I don't think I'm actually going to make any progress in this, but back channels are super important. They will give you the blueprint of what you're hiring. It is like the number one most foundational thing that you could do is understand what those individual strengths and weaknesses are. What it has become is a quest, a search, a beacon, a light for a ding in someone's helmet. And what it was designed to do was to give you a 360-degree view of a candidate's strengths and weaknesses so that you can then get a full picture of the person that you hire. And so those back channels have now become, and I see this in all of my founders now, young and old. Hey, I'm talking to Paul Daversa. Would you hire that guy? Yeah, he's got a good reputation. Would you really hire him? Like, have you ever been in a situation? Well, there's one time he let me have it. Oh, is he collaborative? Well, I don't know how collaborative he is. Would you bet on the guy? I don't know. And as soon as you have beaten someone down into this moment of pause, which is what the human animal does. It's the nature. You've basically defeated the purpose of finding out how you're going to best manage this person. By the way, when I'm interviewing someone, doing a back channel, I always ask them, if we were hiring you, hey, Rick, we'd like you to come on our board, the board of the company we're hiring, because you know the candidate best from Stripe, and you're probably going to give us great insights how to make that candidate most successful. What would you say, and what would you do to make the candidate successful? There are ways in which you can really get a blueprint. So that would be the second thing. And then I guess the third one would be I think that founders, the greatest of founders, by the way, I saw the founder hands come up, me included, by the way. And I mentioned a lot of really impressive founders that whose companies are worth billions and billions of dollars. They're all like insecure, have imposter syndrome. They're nervous. They're scared. I walk with these guys like, dude, what if it all like evaporates tomorrow? And so one of the things I would say about the founder's pitfall is scope creep in terms of the erosion of their confidence. And I think the community, including investors, I think an investor's number one job is to inject a shot of vitamin B in the spirit of the founder to keep the optimism forward, because it's amazing what you could do on sheer optimism.
Vitamin S. Spirit.
Yeah, I think that's great. So data points, back channels, optimism, really important. Rick, I want to throw this over to you. Gen AI is moving so fast at this point, and OpenAI is probably the example of a company where the roles you'll need to hire for in the next 36 months genuinely don't exist because it's moving at breakneck speed. So how are you and your team essentially balancing today's hiring needs for plans in terms of building and growing in the future? And how do you even begin to build a blueprint or a talent acquisition roadmap when you're trying to focus on the now, but also the 36 months from now?
Yeah, this is a very important question that we ask ourselves a lot. And I think any founder is going to be faced with this question as well, especially when you're early stage. You know, your evolution is arguably faster because if you're successful, you're going through some of the, I call them chapters, but Paul, as you mentioned, those different leadership cycles and the people who are scaling and maybe not scaling with you. But a really sort of helpful exercise that I always like to do with leadership is to really walk through, okay, where do we see ourselves from, in 3 to 5 years from now? You don't want to go too far ahead or beyond that, because I think that when you are a fast-moving business, there's going to be pivots, there's going to be changes, but have some view of the future of like, where do we want to be and where are we going to land? And then walk back from there. And so if this grand vision has a set of sort of objectives and outcomes that we want, you're asking questions like, what locations will we need to be in? How are we going to get closer to those users? What teams that run alongside organizations that need to scale or start? What teams do we need to support them? And really start to build out an organizational map of the future. And as I mentioned, start walking back from there. So what time horizon do we think we're going to do X? Where are we going to be with Y? And what you're able to do then is be able to think through these different arcs of an organization and then proactively start thinking about those people of tomorrow whilst balancing with the organizational needs right now. The other piece as well, as I think, is all around designing your interview process and really thinking about, okay, I want to understand, can this person do the job, but also, what are the behaviors that really embody success at this company? What are those principles that allow me to see someone evolve and grow with a business? Being entrepreneurial, being a first principled thinker, these are, in my opinion, very, very key things that you want someone to have. So that when you are faced in a situation where this role has never existed before, you've actually got people that you've got the confidence can stretch into those and actually help break through some of these sort of glass ceilings. And then bring others along. I mean, you think about research, it's on the frontier of everything that we do. And these folks are really inventing products that were in movies and sci-fi, our dreams. They've never done that before. but they have a certain set of attributes that allow them to be able to stretch into these other areas and then bring other people along so that the organization is evolving alongside sort of their brilliance, as it were. And so, in summary, it's very much, okay, let's have a long-term organizational plan and work back from there, and then really think about those behaviors, values, those attributes of a person that really tie to success at your company that you know will give you more confidence they can go through some of those chapters and help you push through some of those boundaries.
Sure. And just out of curiosity, for, an organization as big as OpenAI, how are you also empowering your talent org, right? So your team to essentially pull the trigger and say, hey, we need to hire now versus waiting another 3, 6, 9 months.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a critical part of our job as recruiters and sourcers. It's, I mentioned earlier, being that strategic partner. If you don't have that solid and strong understanding of the organization at whatever altitude you interface with, you're not going to be able to be the partner that I know my team is today, and they really stretch me to be on their behalf when they're not in the room. And it is about understanding those organizational needs. I don't want to keep repeating myself, but that is such an underpinning principle to helping a leader understand their talent strategy and roadmap. The person they're really excited about, that actually when you see them, you're like, this is not the right person, and here are the reasons why. And it does go back to really important points that you've said, Paul. We call it vibes. The vibes were not right, or etc. But having someone really anchor on why those vibes were good or why those vibes were not right. And if you can't get a solid answer, truly engage in sometimes a difficult conversation to get that person to see a different perspective than the one that maybe some of their bias is blinding them with. And so, yeah, the team themselves really push hard to be those trusted strategic partners to help all of the leaders navigate all of their talent sort of challenges and opportunities.
Yep, makes complete sense. Thank you. Xander, do you want to throw in a third word? We've got signal, vibes. I'm wondering, from your VC perspective, if you'd like to contribute to this bucket. I'm just kidding. We're gonna move on.
I could give you one if you want. It's not one word, it's 3 words.
Go for it.
Secure the bag.
There you go. Perfect. In all seriousness, for the early stage founders in this room who are preparing to raise, either for the first time, what do you think the most common mistake that you see in founders is when they're getting ready to do this? And what's also the best example you've seen in a founder getting it right? And maybe a piece in terms of how they can build the confidence to align with investors like yourself.
Yeah, so I think that there is one word that I think will absolutely nail this, which is practice. Even the best founders, no one's a natural at it. No one is naturally born a founder. I think it's something that you just get used to, the pain that comes associated with that, whether it's missing birthdays, having to work extra long hours, not having any money for years on end. While your friends are working at, Google and wherever else, they're, doing extraordinarily well. So I think it all comes down to just like absolute practice. So you have, thousands and thousands of hours over the course of a year. And if you look at the founders that have done the best, they all just put the time in. And I think, when I think back to my first company I started out of college, the one thing that we focused mainly on when we went out to go raise our seed round was we just practiced our pitch to everybody and anybody that would listen. So I think the number one thing is just practice and reps. Like there's nothing that can replace that. For example, there's a company that I have in my portfolio that's getting ready to raise a Series A. I spend as much time as they need for them to just have me sit in on a meeting while they practice their pitch. And I will we'll role play. I'll say, pretend we've never met. Pretend I have some contacts, but not a lot of contacts. Pretend I've known your business for years, or I've known you as a friend for years. And what it does is it, one, gets you comfortable. So you're not nervous. And when you're nervous, you kind of make mistakes. The second thing is you get really good at objection handling, and you can kind of read the body language of the person you're pitching, or the employee that you're trying to hire is another really critical part. And then third, you just nail it. You know what's coming. You're ready to go. And I think that is like the number one key to success I've seen of, kids that, maybe didn't go to an Ivy League school. I went to UC Santa Cruz, not the best school, not most well known for academics. But what it takes is just practice to get past everybody else. So I actually think that if you come from a background that you're not given a broad permit to just say, oh, I went to Harvard, you're going to get into every door. But once you get in the door, that's when the work starts. And my first business I started actually was a people analytics company. And so we would run analytics on absolutely everything. So we worked with like Facebook, BNY Mellon, Nestle. And so one stat that we always were just like totally blown away by was compensation based on school that they attended for college. After the first 2 years in any company, it always leveled out. So it doesn't really matter where you start. It's like really how you finish and all the work that you have to put in to get there. I think, kids that don't come from, elite schools actually are going to work harder if they're in the room with you and they've really put the time in. Because they know how much it sucks to be heard no. You hear the word no
Gritty.
more than anything. And so you build that grit and like that energy to just keep going through it. So yeah, that's practice.
Is there anything you think, like, once you're in the room, right? Like, you've been on both sides of this. Is there anything outside of practicing and spending time with individuals like yourself? Is there anything that you remember, like, being in the room that you could give a piece of advice to these founders where it's like, hey, you may not expect this, but this is what you're going to be asked?
The number one thing that you absolutely have to know dead cold are your numbers. Like, that is full stop. If you get to that question at the end and you are confusing, ARR versus MRR versus what are your unit economics, it depends on any number of questions you get asked. You have to know every single number cold. The second there's any hesitation or someone says, actually, no, I meant to say booked revenue, not, LOIs, it really throws the whole conversation off. So I think knowing the numbers cold is a really good place to practice. And that also shows that you just know your business really well. And it depends what stage of company you're at, but every stage there's going to be some numbers that are just mission critical to know. So if you're pre-seed, you're going to have to know what your market size is. For your seed round, you're going to have to know how many customers you have and like what your average contract value is. Series A, you're going to have to know your gross margins. B and beyond, you're going to have to know, what your EBITDA looks like. If you're going public, you're going to have to know obviously everything. But I think those are the really mission critical parts to the numbers that you're going to have to know.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about the operators who really make the difference, that makes the difference. And Paul, I'm hoping you will share with us a story if you can. But the theme is obviously, we've talked about this. It's unshakable grit, it's resilient, it's tenacity. And to my point earlier, you touched on it briefly, but I want to talk about someone that truly embraces the high will versus high skill, what those differences look like, but you've been in the trenches. So is there a story in particular that comes to mind that you could share that kind of encapsulates, the high will, high skill, the grit, the tenacity piece?
So many. I'm going to pick a couple. I'm going to kind of power through this really quickly because the main theme that Xander was talking about is really about grit, determination, fortitude, pushing through things. I am also a byproduct of that. I went to a university called the Delphi University, which I saw a book in a bookstore that says the best university in America for your B student. Well, yeah, okay. I barely got into college. My parents were immigrants. I barely got out of college. So I am one of you. I'm the kid that's not supposed to be here. And I am the one that could not be outworked. You could not outwill me. You could not outwork me. You could outsmart me. And I've become a lifelong learner. It takes me longer. But everything worked out just fine. So one of the things I would say is I think you get shaped in your life by these inflection points that you have. Usually inflection points are moments of crisis that shape you. They are things that define you at your weakest moment, either failure. So I hire people on mistakes. I'm constantly asking, what are the mistakes you've made and how did they shape you? Not the ones that were catastrophic that cost the company, but what are the ones that that was close? Because you learn so much about the character and the humility of the individual, and I think humility is character. At the end of the day, though, I will tell you that one of the most important things that happens is how you respond to setbacks. And I know you know that quite well. So anyway, stories. I'm going to tell you really quickly. There's a guy who's the CEO of MongoDB. I placed him in the job at MongoDB 7 years ago. He's done an amazing job of creating a transformational company. I really kind of screwed that one up, though, because I had placed him right before that. He quit on me 90 days into the job, and I let him have it. A very well-known guy at that time, but I lost my way. And whatever you're thinking, whatever word you're thinking, make sure it starts with an F, because that's what I called him many times over. And then 24 months later, I was awarded the MongoDB search, and I had to go back to Dave. And I said, hey, I have something I want you to take a look at. And he's like, whoa. We have some unsettled business. And I'm like, what's that? And he's like, listen, I talked to the previous investors. They said you said beep about me. And at that moment, I said, you know what, Dave? I'm not going to lie. I did make that statement. 100%. I called you that. I was emotional. I lost my way. And I don't know what to tell you. We have two choices here. You could either tell me to go pound sand, or we could lay our swords down and accept my apology, because I'm not really proud of it. That was $1 billion decision by Dave to take that call and make that decision. The second story, that all turned out great, by the way. The second story is, I'm going to pick one that I think Rick will like, since his CFO is Sarah Fryer. And I've now placed Sarah Fryer at Square, and I've also placed her at OpenAI. But when I met Sarah, I was working on the CFO search for Square. We were running out of time because the search was not going well. Jack Dorsey had a very set of criteria. He wanted someone in every function who had a product-esque DNA. And we couldn't find it. Well, I thought we had 4 people that could do the job, and Jack was like, nope, not the person. So I had a late night meeting, 10 o'clock dinner with a candidate I thought was it. At that point, it was not. That was clearly not the person. Made a decision, it's not going to make the cut. But while he was on the way out, I said, hey, one other second. Is there anyone else at Salesforce that was worth me calling? And he's like, have you heard of this person, Sarah Fryer? She started 8 months ago. I'm like, no, never heard of her before. She's like, well, she just came in from Goldman Sachs. She's all Goldman Sachs, which is not my profile. So as soon as he left, I called my partner on the East Coast, 1 o'clock in the morning. And I said, get me a meeting with Sarah Fryer before I get on my plane. If you don't, stay up all night. And you will not have a job in the morning. You do not get me a meeting with Sarah Fryer. So like 3 o'clock in the morning, I get a note. Sarah Fryer will meet you for coffee tomorrow morning. Long story short, I meet Sarah, and like Sarah, like, you know, is one of those that walks in and projects, you know, and sucks the air out of the room. Having said that, she also is very polished and didn't seem very gritty, and was like, you know, Goldman Sachs. And so at some point during the interview, I looked at her. I said, Sarah, I got to be honest with you. I have no idea. Let me just tell you what I'm thinking so you don't have to guess. You're not tough enough. I don't see it. And she leans over and she says, let me tell you a story, Paul. I was born in Ireland. I was raised in Ireland on a farm. I'm like, mm-hmm. She's like, every Wednesday, we would go out to shear sheep with my dad. I'm like, okay. She looked me in the eye and she said, have you ever sheared a sheep? I'm like, no, I haven't. She's like, let me tell you what happens. You wrap your arms around the sheep. You wrestle it to the ground. You shear it. You are filled with mud and everything else. And I'm like, got it. Then she leans over and she's like, don't ever question whether I'm tough enough. That turned out to be a couple $100 million decision. And so, I don't know, those two stories I think tell about mistakes and also about sometimes you just got to try to x-ray someone's soul. And while she didn't have the qualification, I called Jack and said, she's not qualified, but damn, is she good? You got to hire her. And he did.
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect combination. The first one being humility and also coming back swinging strong with grit. So to all the founders out there, maybe shearing sheep is on the resume next before you get in the room with the VCs. Real gritty. But Rick, so this is actually a really great transition. So obviously we've talked about grit, the tenacity piece. When you were thinking about operators, right? You've got wartime operators, you've got peacetime operators. Both bring distinct strengths, but rarely does one person embody both. So how do you evaluate whether a leader has the adaptability to navigate intense growth, crisis, or stability? And then when you're looking at those two options in front of you, what's the hardest decision in terms of hiring that you've had to make sure that it does align with leadership?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I see we've got 5 minutes, so I'm going to move somewhat quickly here. And Sarah Fryer definitely has. She's marvelous, and she's absolutely marvelous. So yeah, I mean, it is rare that a leader has both, and I think that you need both though in an organization. I am personally a little bit more biased that. I mean, I kind of consider myself a wartime leader. I do think that there's value and more a greater surface area that a wartime leader can cover. That being said, you do need people that are able to really engage in an organization that is sort of doing well and push it in the direction that it needs to go to in a more sophisticated and maybe nuanced way. But to get really back to your question, I'm going to be forthcoming here is maybe a bit of a tactical answer, but it really boils down to the interview process. And you have to break down what do you want to see from this person. And I think whenever you're hiring a leader, that time is precious, but you should spend no more time with a leader than any other hire that you make. You want to really understand what are the needs of this organization and what do you need from this leader. And I think, Paul, you've touched on it perfectly, right? You're really breaking down and trying to see the person inside, not just sort of the answers that they're providing in the interview itself. Some principles or sort of focus areas maybe is a better word here, that I think is key when you're evaluating a leader. A couple of things. The first is, how do they navigate crisis management? Really understand a previous crisis that they've worked through, the decisions that they made, and what were the overall outcomes. And those outcomes can't just be rosy, they have to be anchored in data. Where did you see you move the needle? Where did you have to get out of the red into the black? What decisions did you make? Gives you an understanding of like, how did they anticipate challenges along the way? How did they pivot and react? The trade-offs that they made, and ultimately their judgment. Secondly, you want to make sure that they can scale. Scale means different things to different businesses, but I think organizational scale is absolutely critical. A great interview, in my opinion, is to have someone walk through their organization. Whiteboard it for me. Who are your top performers? Why are they top performers? What have you done to invest in them and elevate their skills? Who are those you're worried about? Why are you worried about them? Why aren't they pacing with the organization? Really dissect sort of their org and the ways in which they're sort of helping it evolve and making, again, tough decisions there. And their self-awareness and humility, really get them to reflect on some of the challenges that they faced. What would you do differently? How have you navigated these really hard times in an organization? How have you set strategy and direction at a high level and performed sort of longer term planning? Where did you have to pivot? Really just sort of breaking down the person, the organization that they're building, how they navigate crisis, and ultimately kind of what are the outcomes that they've achieved over a time horizon. I think they're the critical things you understand with any leader. I know there was a second part to our question, but maybe I'll wait, and I know you've got another question for Xander.
No, I think that's great. I know we have 2 minutes left. I saw the time. So maybe Xander, if you want to take us home with this last piece, it'll tie in nicely with Rick's last question. But I think there are, every once in a while, right, you'll find certain founders that assume that, one, the leadership teams will grow naturally as the company scales. And also, two, the assumption that the business is going to just keep scaling, right? So we've talked a lot about talent, but why don't you bring us home in the sense on the business side, right? So where's kind of the one or two blind spots that you see founders overlook as they do scale? And how do you advise them to course correct?
Yeah, so I think the one underlying thing I said earlier, now that I'm thinking about it, is actually the right phrase, which is secure the bag. That's the one thing that is persistent from pre-seed all the way through post-IPO. When you're going from pre-seed or seed into Series A, product market fit is the absolute most important thing. So surrounding your team and yourself with the best possible product people. When you're going from, let's say, you've got product market fit into a B or a C, round and company, the best place to start to really push on your business is really to nail the unit economics. So really surround the team with people that are very analytical, especially folks that have some bit of background in finance, because finance folks tend to have really strong analytical skills, and they can really help the company to understand where they're at from a metrics perspective. And then the third thing, which is kind of like post C into like post IPO, which is something that OpenAI is dealing with now, which is governance. Governance is a really big thing, especially for companies at the latest stage. So the one underlying thing is secure the bag. The second thing that you'll see is that really good product market fit, and then going into understanding your unit economics and the financial health of your business, and then finally the governance. And so each of these steps requires first secure the bag, right? Then you have to have all these other things kind of stacked on top of each other as the company tends to grow. So you can start to think about, from a hiring perspective and a manpower perspective, what's required to be able to sustain those different pillars as you grow your business. So
Perfect. Thank you. I know we're out of time right now, but if you can give it up for Paul, Xander, and Rick. Thank you guys for joining us today.